Hi, my name's Demi. My sister once poured soda into the gas tank of my SUV and smiled while saying, "Oops, just an accident." But that wasn't the beginning. That was just the moment I realized they'd been rewriting my life for years, silently, systematically. They used my name to get loans, erased me from family speeches, forged my signature on legal documents, all while calling it love. Have you ever felt like you were being erased from your own family one tiny decision at a time, until you no longer existed? I used to think I was overreacting. Now I wonder, how many times did I excuse betrayal because it came dressed as family? Saturday mornings were usually my calmest hours. The silence before life remembered to roar. I'd brewed my coffee just the way I liked it, black, no sugar, no pretense, and I was halfway through adjusting the last few lines on a work proposal when I realized I hadn't moved my SUV into the shade like I usually did on weekends. I grabbed my mug, slid into my house slippers, and stepped out into the driveway of my Denver home. The sun was already casting long shadows, but the air still had that early morning chill. That's when I noticed it. The gas cap. It was open, hanging there like a forgotten secret. Next to it stood Isolde, my older sister, holding a half-empty bottle of soda like she'd just finished watering a dying plant. She looked at me with that face I'd grown to loathe. Not angry, not guilty, not even embarrassed. Just that smug, bored smirk of someone who's gotten away with things her entire life. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "Oops, just an accident." I didn't speak. Not immediately. There was a pause, less than 2 seconds, but it felt like I'd stood there for a whole season, watching that syrupy liquid slide down the side of my black SUV. My breath caught, not from surprise, but from the confirmation of something I'd buried for years. I walked over, crouched beside the rear of the car, and sniffed. Soda, sweet, carbonated, completely incompatible with a fuel system. My hand trembled, but not because I was scared. My body simply hadn't caught up with the realization that something deliberate had just been wrapped in laughter. Isolde had always been reckless, but this was different. I straightened, looking at her without a word. She offered a shrug, like she'd forgotten whether she meant to kill the car or refill the washer fluid. "Is this like the time you accidentally sent my college application to the wrong address?" I asked calmly, no hint of emotion in my voice. She blinked, one beat too long. "That was ages ago. Let it go already. Let it go." Again. This was the same woman who'd once mistakenly taken my prescription anti-anxiety meds and then made a joke about how I was always too tightly wound anyway. The same woman who broke the necklace Grandma left me, then swore it must have been cheap if it broke so easily. And now, soda in a gas tank. "Cars can be cleaned," said a voice behind us. I turned to see Marlene, our mother, watching us from the porch, holding her phone like she was about to post a gardening tip instead of witnessing an act of sabotage. "Don't be dramatic, Demi," she added, stepping down toward us. "Isolde probably thought it was the windshield washer." "Did you?" I asked, looking directly at my sister. Isolde's eyes narrowed, then widened, then shrugged again. It was early. Who knows?" I did. I knew. But I didn't scream. I didn't lash out. I didn't do anything the old me might have done when I still believed pointing out truth made people listen. I stood there, nodding slightly as if I'd been given a weather report I didn't ask for. I turned and walked back into the house. By the time I'd rinsed out my mug and sat back down in front of my laptop, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, unwilling to move. The document I'd been editing, fiscal projections for the next quarter, blurred in my vision. It wasn't about the SUV. It never had been. It was about the pattern, the quiet, intentional erasure of me that had started long before gas tanks or birthday parties or graduation speeches. The way Marlene always had two versions of everything, one that involved praising Isolde, and one that explained why I should be proud just to be there. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the one who balanced checkbooks at 16, the one who never borrowed money, the one who took care of Grandma until the end, even when it meant missing 3 weeks of work. Isolde was the glitter, the sparkle, the she means well wildcard that everyone forgave. And me? I was the too serious one, the hard-to-love one, the one who always needed to lighten up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scent of soda, stale and artificial, still clung to my nostrils, even though I hadn't stepped outside in hours. I sat in my office, lights dimmed, screen dark, and opened my leather-bound journal. It was a gift from myself to myself 2 birthdays ago. The first year I didn't wait for someone else to acknowledge my existence. I turned to a fresh page and wrote just 1 sentence. Next time, I won't say anything either, but I will be ready. And this time, I meant it. It took just 1 bank notification to confirm what I already knew. I was being erased financially too. But before that message lit up my phone, I had already made the choice to stop pretending things were okay. And that shift started the moment I stepped onto my mother's back patio, 2 days after the soda incident, holding a birthday cake I had custom ordered with her favorite buttercream and paid for in full, along with the caterers and the rented outdoor tent. It was a Sunday afternoon, just past 2. The Colorado sun was bold that day, beating down on the manicured backyard Marlene had insisted be perfect for photos. Round tables were draped in white linens, silver balloons fluttered on each chair, and a jazz playlist hummed through portable speakers. People I barely recognized mingled near the bar, cousins, neighbors, old church ladies whose names escaped me. I slipped through the crowd unnoticed, which didn't surprise me anymore. My family had mastered the art of seeing only what, or who, they wanted to. Isolde was already there, of course. Wearing a pale pink wrap dress that matched the decorations, she was surrounded by a small orbit of admiration, guests laughing too hard at her jokes, touching her elbow like she was royalty. I watched her toss her hair back and say, "Well, you know how hard it was to pull this all together," as if she'd been planning this party instead of just showing up 30 minutes ago. I set the cake down on the buffet table and quietly made my way into the kitchen, checking on the platters of deviled eggs and shrimp cocktail. The caterers gave me a polite nod, one recognizing me from the payment app I'd used. I returned to the backyard just in time to hear the clinking of a fork against a glass. Marlene stood at the head of the patio, arms lifted slightly, smile fixed and polished. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "It means so much to be surrounded by family and friends, especially in times like these when people are so busy and disconnected. It's just special to have this moment together." She looked around, paused for effect, then placed her hand on Isolde's shoulder. And none of this would have been possible without my beautiful daughter Isolde, who organized everything so perfectly. Applause. Isolde feigned modesty, touching her chest as if humbled. I stood there, invisible. No mention of me. No nod. No, and Demi helped too. Not even a glance in my direction. Just like that, I was erased. A few guests turned toward me, those who knew better, but no one said anything. The music resumed. People returned to their wine glasses and gossip. I stepped back, my heart pounding not from anger, but a kind of slow-burning disbelief. It wasn't just that they ignored me, it was that they expected me to swallow it like I always did. I stayed for another 20 minutes, long enough to cut and serve slices of cake like I was part of the catering staff. Then I slipped into the house to grab my purse. As I passed through the living room, my eyes landed on the family photo wall. There were 12 frames, all positioned perfectly along a beige-painted wall in 2 straight rows. Dad's Navy portrait, Isolde's graduation photo, Uncle Mitch with his ridiculous fishing hat, even photos of my cousins and their dogs. And then there was mine, 5th from the left, in the 2nd row. No nameplate. Every other frame had one, gold-etched plates reading things like Isolde, the firstborn, Grandpa Thomas, Dad, retired Navy. Mine was blank. I stepped closer, as if the light might reveal some engraving I had missed. Nope. Just a frame, just a face. It was a photo from my first promotion ceremony. Me in a gray suit, holding a plaque, smiling at the camera. I had emailed that picture to Marlene years ago when she asked for an update for the wall. She hadn't even bothered to label it. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Then I opened my email app, sent it to myself, and typed just 1 sentence in the subject line. This is the moment I stopped trying to belong. Walking out of that house felt different this time. Not because I was hurt, though I was, but because I had finally stopped hoping for them to act differently. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you let go of wishing people will change. Driving home, I turned off the music. Let the silence settle. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Work was waiting. Numbers to run. Reports to file. The usual spreadsheet calm, until the bank alert popped up on my screen. A new authorized user had been added to one of my older joint credit accounts. I froze. That account had been dormant for years. A backup. A just in case. It wasn't linked to anything current, but I'd kept it open because closing credit lines can mess with your score. I clicked to view details. Isolde. She'd added herself as a user. Without telling me. Without asking. And somehow, she'd already made 2 charges. One at a luxury spa, another at a boutique in Cherry Creek that sold handbags I couldn't pronounce. My fingers hovered over the keyboard again, but this time, I didn't feel frozen. I felt ready. But before I lawyered up, I needed to see just how deep the damage ran. And to do that, I had to go quiet for a while. Not disappear, just observe. That same evening, after I'd closed out my laptop, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, just staring out the window above the sink. The light outside had softened to that dusty gold hue Colorado evenings tend to wear in early spring. Cars passed along the street. A dog barked somewhere nearby. Life, as always, carried on. I poured myself another half glass of wine, then sat back at my computer and logged into the credit account that had triggered the alert. The purchases were right there in bold, like a neon billboard on a back road I never meant to drive down. A full-day package at a wellness retreat in Boulder. A $1,200 charge at a boutique specializing in image consulting. Another for a 2-night stay at an Aspen resort, under my name, Isolde. Always aiming to upgrade herself on someone else's dime. I reached for my phone and fired off a single text. "Did you open a card under my name?" Her reply came back in less than a minute. "Wow, I thought we shared everything. Don't be petty." I stared at the screen for a while. Then the family group chat lit up. Marlene chimed in. "Let's not turn this into drama. We're family." There it was again. Family as a shield, as a weapon, a place where wrongdoing could live as long as it wore a familiar face. I didn't respond. Instead, the next morning, I called Noah. We hadn't talked in over a year, but he picked up on the third ring with a warm, surprised, "Demi, you okay?" "Not really," I said. "I need help." Noah had gone to law school after working in admin for a mid-size firm. He now worked as a legal assistant for a title and probate office downtown, and he still owed me for helping him pay rent 3 months straight after a breakup he never fully got over. I explained the situation. Light on emotion, heavy on facts. "I can pull recent property filings under your name," he offered, "just to see what's out there." By lunch, he'd emailed me a PDF. It was worse than I thought. The family condo, our parents' old place on West Alameda, had been quietly transferred from joint ownership to sole ownership. Isolde's name sat at the top. Mine was nowhere in sight. Well, almost nowhere. My signature was on the final page. Big, swooping, and wrong. There was something off about it. The curve of the letters was too playful, the spacing not like mine, but it was the G that sealed it. My last name, Riker, had never looked like that under my hand. That looped backward curl, it was unmistakable. Isolde used to practice my handwriting when we were kids. She'd write fake notes to teachers, pretending to be me. She once forged a sick note to get out of gym, using my name. We laughed about it back then. Now, not so funny. I needed to see the original. So I left work an hour early, told my boss I wasn't feeling well, technically true, and drove down to the city clerk's office. Traffic was light. The drive took 17 minutes, but it felt like hours. The woman behind the counter had a kind face and wore red-framed glasses that matched her lipstick. She pulled the deed file for me without asking too many questions. I took it to one of the side tables, sat down, and opened it slowly. There it was. A full-color copy of the transfer document. The signatures looked official, until you examined the pressure of the ink, the inconsistent slant, the schoolgirl loop on the G. I traced the letters with my eyes. Not touching the page, but memorizing every flaw. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't oversight. This was fraud. It was hard to say how long I sat there. I must have looked strange, just staring at a piece of paper like it was a ghost only I could see. But I didn't care. Eventually, I stood, closed the file, and thanked the clerk on my way out. I didn't drive home immediately. I parked 2 blocks away and just sat in the car with the engine off. The air was still, warm inside the cabin. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. That moment, that quiet, suspended breath, I felt it settle somewhere between my ribs. Not fear, not even anger. Just a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. I took the file out of my bag and opened it on the passenger seat. I pulled a sticky note from the dashboard cubby, one of those left over from my budgeting system, wrote a single sentence. "You want ownership? Let's talk legally." I slapped it on top of the page, covering her forgery with my truth. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. My phone buzzed a few times, texts, emails, probably Marlene trying to smooth it over before I made a scene. I ignored them all. When I got home, I slid the folder into a locked drawer in my office and sat down at my desk. I stared at the blinking cursor on my monitor and whispered to myself, let's see how far she went. Because if she'd gone this far, there was no telling what else she'd signed, spent, or stolen in my name. Once I saw how easily my name had been twisted on paper, I started wondering how many other corners of my life had been quietly rewritten without my consent. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, coffee long gone cold, and began scrolling through every digital thread I'd taken for granted. It started with email. I searched my inbox for a message from a client I remembered replying to weeks earlier. Nothing. I tried another one. Same result. The messages were gone. Not in spam, not archived, not even in trash. Just missing. A quick check of my security settings turned everything sideways. My email forwarding was active, set to a secondary address I didn't recognize. A long string of numbers, followed by a generic domain. When I clicked deeper, the account recovery phone number ended in digits I did recognize. My mother's. I froze. Not from confusion, from realization. There was no way this was accidental. No scenario where she could have helped me into this. This wasn't oversight. This was surveillance wrapped in care. She had been reading my mail. For how long? I couldn't say for sure. But judging by the forwarding date in the logs, almost a year. That meant every notification, every lawyer correspondence, even updates from my tax advisor. She'd seen them all. My hands shook, not out of panic, but from a slow, dawning anger, one that settled in the pit of my stomach and began to burn steady. I stepped out onto my back patio for air, phone still in hand. The night was cool, quiet. I hit dial. She picked up almost instantly. Demi? Marlene's voice was too bright, too rehearsed. Everything all right? Have you been reading my emails? There was a pause, just enough to confirm guilt. I was just trying to help, she said. You always say how overwhelmed you are. I thought I could manage some of the clutter. You set up auto-forwarding, accessed my legal communications, and never told me. That's not help. That's intrusion. Oh, come on now, she sighed, tone turning sharp. I did what any mother would do. You're always so busy. You miss things. I didn't miss anything, I said, voice calm but sharp. You stole access and justified it to yourself. Another pause. You're being dramatic. There it was again, my entire life in 2 words. I hung up. No yelling, no begging, just silence. The next morning, I checked my email forwarding settings again. Disabled everything. Changed passwords, set up 2-factor authentication, created a new backup account. Then I checked every financial service, insurance portal, and legal account I could think of. By the end of the day, my digital footprint was scrubbed. Not perfect, but protected. A week passed. Things quieted. On the surface. Then came the graduation party. My cousin Ellie had invited me herself. I'd contributed to her final semester tuition, quietly. No one in the family knew. Ellie was the one person left who didn't treat my silence as weakness. The event was held at a community center near Cherry Creek. Tables draped in school colors, paper banners strung across the walls, buffet trays lined up along the back wall. I arrived early, offered to help with setup, then took a seat near the side so I wouldn't be in the way. I flipped through the printed program someone handed me. Under special thanks and speakers, my name was there, third on the list, right after Ellie's aunt and one of her old high school teachers. But when the speeches started, my name vanished from the air. The MC skipped right over me. Then Isolde stood up, wearing a bright red wrap dress that drew every camera lens. She launched into a tearful monologue about family, sacrifice, and showing up when it counts. She talked about how proud she was of Ellie, how she'd always been behind the scenes, helping however she could. She never used my name, but her final line hit like a slap across the room. Some of us give from the heart, not for recognition. The crowd clapped. I sat there motionless. I didn't leave right away. I waited, watched as people congratulated her like she'd just funded the college herself. One person even said, "You've always been the strong one, Isolde. Some folks need credit, others just do the work." On the drive home, I didn't even turn on the radio, just silence, that kind that wraps around you like a wet sheet, uncomfortable, heavy, impossible to ignore. When I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed, family group chat. Marlene. Isolde's speech was beautiful, really showed what giving without ego looks like. Then someone sent a photo from the event. A wide shot of the family row, all seated neatly, except my seat had been cut from the frame, cropped out, erased. It was deliberate. There was no mistaking it. I sat there for a moment longer. No tears. Just that same feeling I'd had outside the clerk's office when I saw my forged signature. Clarity. I walked inside, slipped off my shoes, grabbed a bottle of water, and texted one word to Noah. Now. The morning after I texted Noah, I woke up before my alarm, something that hadn't happened in years without a flight or an emergency. The light hadn't even broken through the curtains yet, but my mind was already cataloging the steps. No coffee, no phone scroll, just resolve. By 8, I had already submitted my PTO request for the week. A vague note about personal administrative matters to avoid raising questions. My boss replied within the hour. Take the time you need. I appreciated that she didn't ask for details. Boundaries were easier when they were respected without resistance. At 10:30, I met Noah at a coffee shop just far enough from downtown to avoid familiar faces, but close enough to avoid suspicion. We chose a corner booth by the window. He had a legal pad already open, notes scribbled, clips attached. The man came prepared. "You weren't kidding," he said after I handed him the folder. "They really went all in." "That's just the surface," I replied. "I want it all undone. Every access point, every account. I want them locked out of my finances, my medical files, my insurance, subscriptions, everything." Noah nodded. "We'll start with joint accounts. Then I'll draft revocation letters for property co-ownership. We'll file them by end of week." He paused before adding, "You sure you want to do this quietly?" I looked at him and didn't blink. "This is quiet. You haven't seen me loud yet." The rest of the day was a blur of signatures, account closures, and password resets. I visited 2 different banks, a notary office, and logged more time in online portals than I had in the past 6 months combined. By the time I got home, I had revoked everything. My mother's name was no longer listed as my emergency contact. Isolde was removed as co-owner on the property deed. They could no longer trace me through my digital fingerprints, and that's when the dinner invitation came in. A cheerful message in the family group chat. "Let's heal. Sunday dinner, all of us, just us. No tension, no stress. Home-cooked meal like old times." Marlene. No mention of what had happened, no apology, just this sugary, selective amnesia they all relied on to reset the world on their terms. I stared at the message for a full minute before I typed, "I'll be there." Not because I believed anything had changed, but because it was time they saw who they were dealing with now. Sunday arrived with the crisp kind of breeze that hints at summer but doesn't fully commit. I chose my outfit carefully. Nothing flashy, nothing dull, just a solid navy dress with clean lines and no room for interpretations. I pulled my hair back tight, wore minimal jewelry, and kept my expression neutral. As I stepped into Marlene's house, the scent of garlic and butter hit me first. She was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. Her smile stretched too wide when she saw me. "Demi, you made it!" "Of course," I said, placing a small bottle of wine on the counter. "Wouldn't miss it." Isolde appeared in the dining room, rearranging silverware like it mattered. She offered a nod, but not a word. Her posture screamed entitlement. She acted like the host, not the guest. Like she hadn't siphoned money from me for months. Like she hadn't erased my presence from every family occasion with the skill of a PR firm. Dinner began with awkward pleasantries, surface-level chatter, and forced laughs. No one mentioned what had happened, just the way they liked it. I let them have their show. I sipped wine, complimented the roast, even chuckled at one of Uncle Mitch's tired fishing stories. Then dessert was served, chocolate mousse, Marlene's favorite. As the plates were passed around, I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim white envelope. I placed it in the center of the table. Marlene looked at it like it might explode. Isolde froze mid-spoonful. "What's this?" Marlene asked. "Just a few updates," I replied. Figured now was as good a time as any. Inside the envelope were 3 things: official documents confirming closure of all jointly held accounts, a notarized revocation of co-ownership for the condo, a screenshot of the email logs showing months of forwarding to Marlene's private account. Marlene unfolded the papers with trembling fingers. Her mouth opened once, closed, then opened again. I didn't mean to. It was only because you're always so overwhelmed." "You mean I have boundaries?" I said. "You just didn't like them." Isolde scoffed, leaned back in her chair. "This is pathetic. You're treating your own family like criminals." I turned to her. "No, I'm treating you like people who crossed lines and didn't expect consequences." Silence. Marlene tried to regroup. "We're family. We don't need to involve the law." "That's funny," I said, standing. "Because apparently we didn't need to involve me either. You all handled that part on your own." I picked up my purse, smoothed my dress, and looked at both of them. Really looked. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "Just making sure you both understand. That season of my life is over." Marlene's hand trembled as she tried to refold the papers. Isolde rolled her eyes, but her jaw was tight. As I pushed my chair back, I paused. Let the moment stretch. "If either of you crosses a line again," I said, my voice calm and clear, "the next envelope comes with a judge." Then I walked out. No one followed. It didn't take long for the aftershocks to start. 3 days after that dinner, the one where everything finally, irrevocably broke, the first ripple arrived. Not from Isolde directly, of course. She never worked in straight lines. But from the orbit she'd always controlled with ease, the enablers, the sideline sympathizers, the ones who claimed to hate drama but always had a front-row seat. The family group chat, which had been eerily silent since I'd walked away, lit up again. This time, it was veiled concern masquerading as diplomacy, the kind of messages written with sugar on the tongue but knives under the fingernails. "Your sister's just been under so much stress lately, Demi. Maybe you could ease up a bit? I know money gets tricky, but did it really have to come to this? She's your sister. Come on, Dem. She didn't mean to hurt you. Don't punish her for being overwhelmed." Not a single person asked how I was doing. Not one message wondered aloud what it must have felt like to realize that my name, my credit, my history, my trust, had been treated like a shared family resource, like a debit card passed around behind my back. They painted it as punishment, as bitterness, as cold-heartedness, as though I'd simply woken up one morning and decided to ruin Isolde's life out of spite. I didn't reply. Instead, I muted the chat, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and dove into my work emails with the calm of someone who had already made peace with their decision. That afternoon, Noah called. "Hey, you sitting down?" "Give me a second." I lowered myself into the chair by my window, notebook still open beside me. "I ran the monitoring like you asked. Isolde's credit took a major dive. There's a repossession order pending." I didn't say anything at first, just stared blankly at the spreadsheet on my screen, its columns and numbers blurring into abstraction. "It's for the Range Rover," he added. "She missed 4 payments. It was originally under your name, remember? Even though you pulled off the lease last year, the restructure was never finalized." A pause. She assumed you'd keep covering it, because why wouldn't you? The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was familiar. This was the pattern, Isolde leaping with the confidence that someone would catch her. Usually me. Later that evening, I was wrapping up a client report when I caught a glimpse of movement outside my window. At first, I wasn't sure why I turned to look. Maybe it was the low hiss of hydraulics. Maybe some part of me just knew. There she was, Isolde, standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, mouth moving at warp speed. But the tow truck operator didn't blink. He'd seen this 100 times before. Another designer handbag, another angry protest, another, "This is a mistake." He finished the paperwork, hooked up the car, and drove off. Just like that, I didn't gloat. There was no twisted joy in watching it happen, just a quiet, steady reminder that eventually, gravity applies to everyone. 2 days later, the second fracture appeared. It was a text from Eileen, an old colleague of mine who now worked in compliance at a major marketing firm that handled influencer partnerships. "Hey, just so you know, your sister's name came up in a vendor audit. Her paperwork listed your credentials as a reference. It flagged as a fraud risk." I stared at the message for a beat, exhaling slowly before I typed back. "Thanks for the heads up." "She's being dropped from the contract," Eileen added. "Didn't want it to catch you off guard. Sorry." I didn't tell her not to apologize. Some things don't need forgiveness. They just need distance. Apparently, Isolde had used my professional license numbers, my resume highlights, even a quote pulled from an old LinkedIn article I'd written, as part of her own brand credibility. She wove it into her pitches, her sponsorship decks, her influencer identity. For a while, it worked, but lies have a shelf life, and this one expired in the middle of a quarterly audit. There wasn't a public fallout, no dramatic cancellation, just digital silence. Her Instagram went from daily boss babe content to radio silence. No new skincare collabs, no luxury gift hauls, no polished captions about resilience and hustle. The comments trickled in. "Weren't you partnering with GLO? No update on the retreat launch? Is everything okay?" No answers. And then came the last act of this quiet unraveling, a voice message from Marlene. It arrived in the family chat late, just before 11 p.m., while I was reading in bed. I didn't open it immediately. I stared at the notification, thumb hovering over it like it held the weight of everything I'd already chosen to walk away from. Eventually, curiosity won. I tapped play. Her voice was already brittle with emotion, that familiar quiver that always danced on the edge of guilt and manipulation. "Demi, I just don't understand what's happening to you. You're tearing your sister apart. Over what? A misunderstanding? You used to be the one who held this family together. The kind one, the mature one. This isn't you." I paused it there. That was all I needed to hear. It was the clarity I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. They didn't hate what I'd done. They hated that I finally stopped asking for permission. I scrolled back through the group chat, hovered for a breath, then tapped leave group. No fanfare, no message, no closing argument, just gone. The next morning, the universe chimed in with its own escalation. I was sitting at the table, finishing breakfast, scrambled eggs, grapefruit, coffee cooling beside me, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Subject, subpoena, request filed, property dispute. Plaintiff, Isolde Vance. I stared at the screen, my expression unchanged. Then I set the phone down calmly, wiped my mouth, and folded my napkin over the empty plate. No panic, just resolve. I walked to my office, opened my laptop, and began drafting the legal response. Counterclaim, fraud, identity misuse, attached, documentation, timeline, witnesses. If she wanted a courtroom, she'd get one, and this time, she wouldn't be able to crop the truth out of the frame. The message came just as I stepped out of the courthouse lobby, my heels clacking quietly on the concrete walkway, echoing against glass walls that had seen decades of other people's betrayals. Let's talk settlement before this hits the media. No name, just a number I didn't recognize and no courage behind it. I didn't bother replying because I hadn't come to negotiate. I hadn't walked into that courtroom, alone, carrying every document and every silence they'd ever handed me, just to be bartered with after the gavel dropped. The hearing had lasted less than an hour. Noah had been brilliant, calm, concise, not a single word wasted. He presented the packet we'd titled Timeline of Erasure, and that's exactly what it was. A brutal, factual documentation of everything they'd rewritten, my accounts, my property, my signature, my reputation. One by one, he laid it out for the judge. Exhibits A through F, forged deeds, doctored email forwarding rules, unauthorized credit authorizations, screenshots of Isolde's influencer profiles referencing my credentials. The judge, a man in his early 60s with sharp eyes and a tone that didn't rise above conversational, flipped through the files slowly. His silence didn't mean indifference, it meant understanding. He didn't need to ask questions. The paper did the talking. "There's enough here," he said finally, "to warrant full revocation of shared assets. This is not a minor miscommunication. It's a pattern." When Isolde tried to speak, the judge raised one hand slightly, not even looking at her. "You will speak only when you are no longer in contempt." Her mouth snapped shut. Marlene, seated beside her, looked pale. Paler than I'd ever seen her. She didn't argue. She didn't even look at me. She stared straight ahead, like the ceiling might save her. When the judge finalized the ruling, it was as if the last puzzle piece had clicked into place. I was awarded sole ownership of the condo. Marlene's name was removed from all financial affiliations and family accounts where she'd quietly lingered as an administrator. Isolde was ordered to cease any use of my name, credentials, likeness, or affiliation, professionally or personally. The judge added one more line before adjourning. Any future attempt to reinstate shared claims will require direct court approval. It was done. I walked out ahead of them, didn't wait to gloat, didn't turn to see if they followed. The corridor smelled like disinfectant and something vaguely metallic, probably the memory of too many verdicts gone cold. Outside, the air was dry. The sky, for once, didn't feel heavy. As I neared the parking garage, I saw them, Marlene and Isolde, huddled near the stairwell, whispering. Marlene was holding Isolde's hand, gently rubbing her shoulder like she used to when we were kids, and Isolde would throw tantrums in public. Her face was drawn, her mouth tight. Isolde's eyes were red, but her sobs were silent. She wasn't sorry. She was embarrassed. There's a difference. I didn't stop walking. Later that evening, I made myself a bowl of pasta, poured a glass of wine, and opened my laptop to check the final copies of the court documents Noah had sent over. Everything looked in order. Before shutting it down, I glanced at the phone again. Another text had come in, same unknown number. "This can still be private. Let's avoid escalation." I deleted it. The next morning, the Denver Post ran a story on digital fraud involving influencer marketing. It didn't name names, but it referenced a local civil case where credentials had been misused to land corporate sponsorships. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't need to. An hour later, my old high school friend Kelly texted me a screenshot. "Is this about your sister?" I typed back, "Not my story to tell." She replied, "Well, whoever it is, I hope the real victim gets peace." I didn't correct her. That was enough. By afternoon, the family group chat, which I had long since left, exploded. My cousin forwarded me screenshots without asking. "You humiliated her. You've always been jealous. I hope you're happy." And finally, from Marlene herself. "You burned everything down over a piece of paper." That one stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it was so wrong. They had burned it. I had just stopped pretending the ashes were confetti. That evening, I sat by the window in my living room. The light outside had softened into a dusky orange, the kind that made the tops of trees glow. A soft breeze nudged the curtain. I hadn't spoken to anyone all day, and I didn't mind. My phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't from a blocked number. It was a new message, from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line: Request to discuss mediation, Vance versus Riker. I closed the notification because I didn't need discussion. I didn't need settlement. I needed closure, and it was already mine. I didn't answer because I wasn't interested in going back. The message had been clear, desperate even, but it came too late and from the wrong place. Fear, not remorse. I set the phone face down on the windowsill beside the cabin's coffee pot. Steam was already rising from my mug. The air that morning was crisp, clean, sharp with pine. I could see the edge of the lake from here, still as glass, the trees mirrored in its surface like it couldn't be bothered to move anymore. I understood that. After the hearing, I'd driven up here alone. No calls, no company, no second guessing, just quiet. Noah handled everything that came after. The letters, the notices, the questions from attorneys who were suddenly full of options. I told him exactly what to say. She's not interested in negotiation. The ruling stands. I guess that's what happens when you spend a lifetime being overlooked. People don't know what to do when you finally step outside the frame they built for you. 3 days after the ruling, Marlene messaged me directly. No voice notes, no drama, just a single line of text. You've made your point. Now fix it. You've humiliated the family. I sat with that sentence for almost an hour. Then I typed my response and hit send. I didn't humiliate anyone. I just stopped participating in the humiliation of myself. That was the last I heard from her. But the family wasn't done with me. I found out through a forwarded email, because of course someone thought I should still be included, that a family meeting had been scheduled. To discuss distribution of the remaining estate from Grandma Quinn, it read. Location, the same lakeside cabin where I was currently sipping my coffee. Date, Saturday, 2 p.m. They didn't know I was already here, and I didn't plan to be present. Instead, I called Noah and asked him to represent me. They need a witness, not a target, I said. He didn't argue. Saturday arrived with a cloudless sky and a breeze light enough to rustle the birch leaves. Around noon, I walked down to the dock, set out a folding stool, and began painting with 2 of the neighborhood kids, Sophie and Caleb, both under 10, both more honest than most adults I'd met in the last decade. They asked about the birds. I showed them how to mix watercolors to get that dusty blue shade chickadees carry. We talked about clouds, shadows, where the light came from, and why it changed so fast. At 2:05, Noah called. It's done. I didn't stop brushing the color across the paper. Go on. They held the meeting at the county courthouse. Your nameplate wasn't set out, just a chair. Empty, center of the table. I smiled. Figures. He continued. The new will was read. The room was mostly quiet until the part that said, to the granddaughter who had the courage to walk away, I leave not just the property, but the freedom to finally be who she is without being rewritten. I let the brush fall to the water. Then it got interesting, Noah added. He told me the full inheritance, this cabin, what was left in the family trust, even the small antique collection Grandma kept in storage, had been left to me, uncontested, solid, legally tight. Isolde's share, reduced to $1. Marlene. Stripped from any future role as trustee or decision-maker. Apparently, Isolde stormed out of the room, knocking over a glass pitcher on her way. Marlene tried to argue with the attorney present, but he didn't entertain it. He said, and I quote, "This isn't a negotiation, this is a declaration." I didn't say anything for a while, just sat there, watching the kids dip their brushes and hum to themselves like the world was exactly as it should be. Noah cleared his throat. You okay? Yeah, I said. I really am. He said he'd forward the documents that afternoon. I thanked him and hung up. Later that evening, after the kids had been picked up by their parents and the sun dipped low enough to turn the lake into liquid copper, I walked inside and found a small envelope on the kitchen counter. No return address. Just my name written in strong, familiar cursive. Inside was a single photograph. It was of the old family photo wall from Marlene's house, taken recently by the look of the frame colors. But one thing had changed. Beneath my photo, the one they never labeled, was a new brass plate. Demi, the one who finally said enough. I stared at it for a long time, then folded the photo and set it beside the unlit fireplace. That night, I made a fire. A slow one, the kind that starts with pine cones and patience. I added the photo without ceremony, watched the edges curl and catch and turn to nothing. Right before bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The night was cool again, stars scattered like salt above the tree line. I held a mug of tea, fingers warm around the ceramic. And then, like it was waiting for the right moment, my phone buzzed. One last voice message. "Demi," Isolde's voice said, clipped and strained. "You think this is over?" I didn't respond, because I wasn't interested in going back. I left the voice message to vanish on its own. No reply, no reaction. I didn't save it, didn't even listen to the whole thing, just deleted it without hesitation. There was no anger, no dramatic flare in my chest. Just calm, the kind of calm that comes when you know nothing they say can pull you back into the script you've already walked off. I leaned on the porch railing and watched the moon peek between the trees. The lake reflected its soft light like a mirror too tired to fight the night. Then I walked back inside the cabin, not as someone retreating, but someone claiming space. That night, after a hot shower and 2 pages of journaling, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a single sentence that had been circling my thoughts for days. They lost access to me the moment I stopped defending my right to exist. I closed the journal and turned off the lamp. The kind of peace I carried wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Not every closure comes with an apology. Some come with silence. And sometimes, silence is the most honest answer left. 3 days later, I checked the online forum where I'd anonymously posted a short version of my story. No names, no specific locations, just fragments of what it felt like to be erased and expected to smile through it. Buried beneath dozens of comments, one response stood out. "You gave me words for something I didn't know I was allowed to feel. Thank you, Demi." That was the first time anyone had used my name in a way that didn't expect me to flinch. I didn't reply. Just stared at the screen, letting the sentence wrap itself around parts of me that had been scraped raw. Whoever that person was, they'd reminded me that truth doesn't need an audience to matter. Later that week, on a Thursday morning draped in clouds, my father showed up unannounced. I heard his old pickup long before I saw him. It idled slow as it climbed the gravel path toward the cabin, crunching over loose stones, tires humming like they'd made this trip in his mind 100 times before. He didn't knock, just stood on the porch until I opened the door. We hadn't seen each other since the funeral. A silent man, always had been. He never took sides, just observed, a quiet presence in a noisy house. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded. We sat on the porch, mugs warming our hands, saying nothing for a long time. The lake shimmered, half covered in morning mist. A pair of loons called out in the distance, breaking the stillness without shattering it. Finally, he spoke. "Your grandma saw this in you long before the rest of us caught on." I looked at him, searching for judgment in his face. But there was none. Just a softness that came not from regret, but from understanding. "I'm not looking for an apology," I said. "I'm not offering one," he replied gently. We sipped. The silence between us wasn't heavy like it used to be. It was something else now, mutual. Before he left, he handed me a wooden box, said Grandma had meant for me to have it, but didn't get the chance to deliver it herself. Inside were old sketches of this cabin, her first drawings when she dreamed of having a place far from the noise, and tucked between the pages, in her spidery cursive, "This is where peace lives. Protect it." That afternoon I walked into town. It was market day. Local honey, ceramic bowls, kids playing tag between vendor booths. A woman named Cheryl from the bakery waved me over. I bought a loaf of sourdough, then stopped by the hardware store. It was time. Back at the cabin, I took the old metal plaque off the post at the edge of the driveway, the one that read Quinn Family Cabin. I replaced it with a new one I'd had made the week before. Safe ground. Not dramatic, not loud, just true. Life after that became rhythm. I taught watercolor to kids at the library on Saturdays, repainted the shutters on the cabin myself, fixed the passenger window on my SUV, finally. No calls to Marlene for help, no borrowed favors. Just me and a YouTube tutorial and a wrench that didn't quite fit, but worked anyway. One evening, the town hosted a community dinner in the school gym, potluck style, folding tables lined with crock pots and casseroles, paper plates stacked high. I brought roasted vegetables and banana bread. At the check-in table, a teenage volunteer handed me a name tag. "Write your name clearly," she said, handing me a Sharpie. I didn't hesitate, didn't shorten it, didn't second guess. "Hello, my name is..." Midway through dinner, while refilling my cup with apple cider, a woman approached me. Late 40s, hair pulled back in a braid, soft eyes that had seen too much and learned how to carry it quietly. "You're the one who stood up to them, right?" she asked. I blinked. "Sorry?" She smiled. "Your story, that post, it made it around, even without your name. But someone said you lived out here now, that it might be you." I didn't panic, didn't feel exposed. Instead, I smiled back. "No," I said. "I just finally stood up for myself." When the dinner ended, I stepped outside. The air had cooled, but the wind was soft. The street lamps buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I paused before getting in the car. "I'm not healed completely," I whispered, voice steady. "But I'm no longer hiding. That's more than enough for now." Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who share your last name. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice after being silenced, choosing truth over peace, and realizing that walking away is sometimes the most powerful stand you can take. Have you ever felt erased by your own family? What would you have done in Demi's shoes? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real, emotional stories that hit home. Your voice matters here. Hi, my name's Joy. At my sister's wedding, the one I helped pay for, they had me watching strangers' dogs in the lobby. No seat at the table, no thank you, not even my name in the program. Then I found out they used my signature to take credit for the entire catering contract. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just canceled everything. But here's what no one asked. What kind of family edits you out of their story while still spending your money? And what happens when the quiet one finally says no? I pulled up to the venue a few minutes past 3. The heat hadn't quite broken yet, and the Georgia air clung to my skin like a second layer. Spanish moss draped the iron gates like it was performing for a postcard. The estate was beautiful, grand, elegant, exactly the kind of place my sister had always dreamed of. It looked like it belonged to a magazine spread, not a family like ours. No one greeted me when I stepped out of my rental. No valet, no clipboard, not even a glance from the staff. I wasn't expecting a red carpet, but when you footed 70% of the catering bill, you'd think someone would remember your name, or at least offer a glass of water. I smiled at a passing florist, adjusting her clipboard and headset. She didn't look up, so I walked. Alone. Inside, everything smelled like expensive perfume and peonies. I took a slow breath, not because I needed one, but because I felt the tension sitting tight between my collarbone and jaw. I knew what was coming. I just hadn't expected it to be this blatant. Near the check-in table, a young woman with a headset looked up. "Name?" "Joy," I said. She paused, tapped something on her iPad, tilted her head. "Sorry, Joy?" I nodded, slow and deliberate. "Oh, I think you're listed under lobby guest coordination. Right this way." No further explanation, no raised brow, no apology, just the click of her heels against polished tile as I followed her down a hallway and into what looked like a glorified waiting area. There were kennels, leashes, a water bowl with a paw print sticker. "You'll be helping monitor the guest dogs today," she said, already halfway back down the hall. I stood there, stunned. Before I could say a word, someone handed me a leash. A Yorkie, panting in a rhinestone harness, wagged its tail at me. "Marcy said you're great with animals," the guest beamed. So sweet of you to do this. Sweet. The word rattled in my ribs like a loose screw. I turned and saw Marceline, my sister, gliding across the marble. She looked like a bridal catalog cover. Tight curls pinned back just enough, high neckline, diamond studs that probably weren't rented. She called out, loud enough for anyone within 50 feet to hear. "Joy, can you hold down the fort here? I'm swamped with seating stuff." I didn't answer. What was the point? There it was. In one sentence, one performance, she turned me from the sister who helped fund her wedding into the woman who watched dogs. By sunset, I had a full set. A golden retriever with anxiety. A pug that wheezed when anyone walked by. 2 mutts who barked at their own reflections. Not once did someone ask why I was in the lobby. Not once did anyone say thank you. When dinner was announced, I peeked through the glass. Long white tables, hanging candles, laughter bouncing off every surface. I looked down at my dress, slate blue silk, chosen to match the wedding palette. It was now marked with paw prints and dried slobber. I smoothed it out anyway, like that would change anything. Through the glass, I saw them raising glasses, forks, eyebrows. I saw Marcy next to her new in-laws. I saw our mother dabbing her eyes. I paid for the wine. I paid for the flowers. I paid for the chairs they were sitting in. But I wasn't invited to sit down. A staff member brought me a boxed meal, cold chicken breast, and 2 limp asparagus stalks. The box said, vendor, dietary, none. I opened it slowly, hands steady, face blank. A man in a beige suit leaned over and whispered, "You're doing a fantastic job. What company are you with?" I forced a smile. Inside, something gave way. Not loudly, not all at once, but like ice cracking underfoot. Slow, steady, inevitable. They didn't forget me. They made a choice. And I was going to make one too. Instead, I stayed seated and watched the chaos unfold without lifting a finger. A server scrambled to pick up silverware that had clattered across the tile. A glass rolled gently until it tapped against the leg of my chair. Somewhere behind me, someone muttered, "This place was supposed to be 5 stars?" And laughter followed, like a nervous aftershock. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. The voice that had sliced me clean out of the family's narrative now called my name like I was part of the staff. And yet, not once, had that voice uttered mine into a microphone, under twinkling lights, in front of the crowd that clapped at every name but mine. I remember sitting straighter, not to be seen, but to be steady. They didn't get to watch me flinch. The MC's voice still rang in my ears. A special thanks to the amazing people who made today happen. To my beautiful bridesmaids, the event team, our brilliant photographer, and of course, Marceline's best friend / planner / savior, Elise. Each name earned applause. Each smile felt rehearsed. And I sat there, the woman who'd wired over $17,000 2 months prior so that every chair, plate, and candlelit centerpiece could exist. When the thank yous ended, so did something inside me. They didn't skip me by accident. They skipped me because it was easier that way. I wasn't decoration. I wasn't a checkbook in heels. But to them, I wasn't worth the syllables. Later, someone from the catering staff handed me a second box. This one marked "Staff, no allergies." She looked confused, even embarrassed, and said, "Sorry, the kitchen had extras. They assumed you were with the crew. Want it?" I didn't correct her. I just nodded and took it. There was no place to sit near the ballroom that didn't feel like I was trespassing. So I walked to the far side of the venue, past the floral arch and fake smile photo shoots, until I found a stone bench half hidden behind a row of hedges. I peeled open the box. Dry bread, iceberg lettuce drowning in dressing, and a chicken breast that tasted like obligation. As I picked at it, I could hear the band starting up inside. Laughter carried on the breeze. I chewed slower, thought harder. The most expensive thing I ever bought was a place at the table. And they still told the story like I never showed up. A man, I couldn't have placed him, wandered near with a glass of wine and looked genuinely pleased to see me. "You're doing such a fantastic job," he said. Are you with logistics or floral? I held his gaze. Something like that? He smiled warmly. People like you keep weddings together. It's all the little things, you know? Unsung heroes. Unsung. I nodded, polite. He meant no harm, but every syllable stung like lemon juice on a cracked lip. Not just invisible, replaceable, rewritten. I thought of the Google Doc I'd helped build for Marcy's seating chart, the spreadsheets I cleaned up for her RSVP tracker, the late-night call when she asked me to reformat her welcome speech because your tone is more professional. And yet, here I was, eating behind hedges with a boxed salad and a nameless badge in everyone's mind. They were writing a story I wasn't in. Worse, they gave my lines to someone else. From across the lawn, I could hear my sister laughing. Real, full laughter, the kind she used when she knew eyes were on her. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice or stomp or cry. I calculated. A woman once told me, if they won't give you a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair. But maybe you don't need the table at all. Maybe you just need to own what you brought. As the sky dimmed and the lanterns flickered on, I walked back toward the lobby. One of the dogs, a little scruffy terrier, licked my hand as I sat beside him again. It was oddly grounding. Uncomplicated affection, no angle, no script. A loud crash came from the dining area. Plates, probably. Someone shouted, "Get the coordinator!" Marcy's voice followed, sharp and ringing. "Joy, can you help?" I didn't answer. I stayed still. The terrier's head rested on my knee. I stroked his ears, slow and steady. I'd been erased in front of everyone. They thought I'd just fall in line again, like always. But I wasn't falling anymore. And mine, as of this moment, was no longer to stay silent. I stayed by the lobby for a little longer, long enough for the noise from the reception to fade into an indistinct hum, like traffic outside a closed window. Then, when the last song of the evening faded into polite applause, and forks clinked against empty dessert plates, I slipped out the side gate toward the guest rooms. No one noticed. That part didn't surprise me. Back in my suite, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed twice. I didn't rush to look. I knew exactly what it would be. Sure enough, first a text from Mom. "Don't cause a scene today. We all have roles to play." Then another, from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, are you coming back in? Cake's about to be cut." I deleted both. My fingers hovered for a second on the home screen, then tapped into a photo album I hadn't opened in weeks. There it was, a picture of the lilac dress. I'd had it made when Marcy asked me to be her maid of honor. Back then, she'd insisted it had to be custom, had to match the palette she called Modern French Garden, with a hint of southern warmth. She'd sent me samples, Pinterest boards, even exact heel heights. The boutique had been small, hidden on a side street near my apartment in Austin. The seamstress, an older woman with a strong accent, had smiled at me as I stood on a block in front of mirrors. I remember thinking how elegant I looked, how for once I might belong in the middle of a room instead of the sidelines. 3 weeks later, I got the call. "Hey, so, quick thing. My college roommate's flying in from Barcelona at the last minute. Total surprise. She's basically family." I thought, maybe she could stand with me? You'd still be part of everything, of course, just not in the photo lineup. You understand, right? I had said, of course. But it wasn't true. I didn't understand. I didn't agree. I didn't even believe her. But I said yes, because that's what was expected. Saying yes had always been easier than being accused of making things harder. The dress stayed at the boutique. I never picked it up. She never asked. Weeks passed, and the rehearsal dinner came and went without my name on the invite. Apparently, only bridal party and partners. The bridesmaids posted a boomerang on Instagram, clinking glasses and wearing silk robes with Team Marcy embroidered across their backs. Not once was I tagged. A few days before the wedding, I'd helped set up Zoom for our elderly aunt, who couldn't travel. Marcy handed me her iPad to test the camera and mic. While adjusting settings, I noticed a chat tab blinking. I didn't mean to click it. It just happened. The thread was titled Wedding Brain Trust. And there it was. Scrolling back a few messages. Let's not include Joy on this. She always gets emotional. Yeah, she'll turn it into a thing, again. We just want this weekend to be peaceful. Don't poke the bear. I sat there holding the iPad, hands oddly calm, eyes blinking slower than usual. I wasn't even angry in that moment. Just hollow. That thread confirmed what I hadn't let myself name for years. I wasn't the complicated one. I wasn't a problem. I was simply inconvenient to their narrative. They didn't push me out once. They never made room. And once you realize you've been orbiting a family that never fully let you in, something shifts. You stop begging to land. You just drift, on purpose. I remembered being 19, missing Thanksgiving because of a paper deadline, and waiting all night for someone to call and ask if I was okay. No one did. When I brought it up later, Mom said, "We assumed you were busy. We didn't want to bother you." They always found a way to make the absence mine to carry. People like me. We build stories in our heads to survive the silence. We tell ourselves maybe they just forgot. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't mean it. Because that's easier than admitting you were never really part of the plan. Lying in bed now, with the soft glow of a lamp and the hum of a far-off elevator, I pulled out a notebook I kept in my travel bag. No frills, just lined pages and a black cover. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "They never pushed me out. They left the door cracked and told me I was the one who refused to walk in." The pen felt heavier in my hand than usual. Somewhere, probably back in the ballroom, they were raising flutes of champagne, toasting love, laughter, and the edited version of family they'd chosen to believe in. That version didn't include me, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to change that. And the best part? They wouldn't even realize what I'd done until it was too late. The next morning started earlier than I expected. I hadn't planned to be awake before the sun, but my body had decided sleep was optional. I sat on the edge of the bed again, this time not with a notebook in hand, but with my phone. I was rereading the contract, my contract for the catering service. Every line, every term, every dollar amount had come from me. My signature was right there, next to the wire confirmation for the first deposit. It was hard to describe what I felt. Not anger. At least not the loud, slamming door kind. It was quieter, more surgical. The kind that made you want to start a spreadsheet. The kind that came from betrayal, with a veneer of good intentions. I closed the file and opened my email. Not to send anything yet, just to be ready. Mid-morning, I headed back down toward the side lawn. Marceline was giving directions to the staff while pretending not to be giving directions. That's always been her style. Managing people like a hostess, smiling as she orders them around. A man in a crisp white shirt, clipboard in hand, approached me with a grin. "You're Joy, right? The sister?" he asked. I nodded. "I just wanted to say, it's been great working with your sister on this. She's a real professional, total command of detail. She really pulled this off." My mouth tightened. "Did she mention who paid for the food?" His eyes flickered. "Oh, well, the contract's under her name now. She sent us an updated authorization last month, full control passed to her team." He meant it casually. He didn't know what he was saying. But I did. She had erased me, paperwork and all. The girl who used to ask me to write her college essays had now put her name over mine. Literally. I managed a smile. "Thanks for letting me know." Walking away, I spotted two of the bridesmaids chatting by the mimosa bar. I hadn't seen them since the rehearsal I was never invited to. As I passed, I heard one of them say, "We'll just keep the brunch menu light. Elise already handled the guest count. Joy's not in the dock anyway." No whisper, no hesitation, just spoken plainly, like I wasn't there. And I didn't even bother to respond. I'd heard enough. "We thought you knew," and "it wasn't personal," over the years, to know they only say that when they get caught. Back in the main house, I sat in one of the hallway nooks where the Wi-Fi was strongest. My fingers moved without hesitation. I opened a text thread with Marceline. "You took credit for the catering I paid for. I'm giving you 24 hours to correct that in your speech tonight." I watched the screen. The typing dots showed up quickly. Her reply: "It's not about credit. Don't ruin this weekend over something so small." So small. Right. The next few minutes passed in a kind of cold clarity. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That text told me everything. She hadn't slipped. She hadn't forgotten. She made a choice. And now, so would I. I closed the thread, leaned back, and opened the contract file again, scrolling to the clause on non-disclosure, on breach of agreement, on primary authority. I highlighted 3 lines and copied them into a new draft. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And it wasn't about vengeance. It was about math. I had made a transaction. They had defaulted. As I was finishing, my phone vibrated again. Another message. This one from my mother. "Let's keep peace, okay? You're family. No need for drama." Drama. That word again. The favorite label of people who hurt you quietly and then ask you to bleed quietly too. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on the side table. I opened my laptop. The email to the catering company was still in draft. All that remained was to attach the proof, sign, and send. If they wouldn't give me my name, then they'd lose the benefit of it. And this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet while they dined on my generosity. The ballroom was already buzzing by the time I arrived. String lights flickered overhead, casting a glow that made everyone look a little more polished than they really were. Waiters weaved between tables like chess pieces, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres. Marceline stood in the center of it all, laughing a little too loud at something someone said, her champagne flute perfectly tilted in one hand. I was told I'd get to speak before the toasts. Just 1 minute, her exact words. "A little thank you from you would mean a lot," she'd texted earlier that morning. But as I hovered near the small stage, I felt the shift in energy. The MC grinned wide, lifted his mic, and announced, "Let's raise our glasses to love, laughter, and a lifetime of memories. That concludes our speeches. Please enjoy your meal." Applause, music, forks hitting china. No mention of me. Again. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I simply stepped back into the crowd, unseen as usual, and let them sip on the wine I paid for. 15 minutes later, I found a quiet spot outside the venue's side garden and dialed the catering office. I needed confirmation. Something in my gut already knew, but I wanted to hear it out loud. The assistant on the other end, a young guy with a professional tone and poor timing, said cheerfully, "Hi, Joy. Let me just pull up the account here. Oh, looks like there was a name transfer. A Marceline Garrow submitted an amended authorization. It shows she's the main point of contact now. That was updated 2 weeks ago." My chest didn't tighten. My breath didn't stutter. I just nodded to myself. "Can you check the authorization signature?" I asked. Yeah. Looks digital. Matches the original file. Signed, Joy Garrow." They'd used my e-signature. I ended the call politely. Then I sat on a low stone wall in the garden, right beneath a patch of fairy lights, and looked down at my hands. She didn't just want credit. She wanted ownership. She didn't just forget me. She removed me. That kind of erasure isn't accidental. It's curated. 10 minutes later, I found her behind the tent, taking selfies with 2 of her bridesmaids. I waited for them to step away before I approached. She didn't even seem surprised to see me. "You look tired," she said, not kindly, just observational, like she was checking off a box. "You changed the billing," I said, "and you cut me from the program." Her eyes rolled. Actually rolled. "Joy, it's a wedding, not a court deposition. Don't start." "I'm not starting anything," I said evenly. "I'm finishing it." She let out a laugh, dry, mocking. "Come on, you're really gonna make a thing out of this?" "This isn't a thing," I said. "It's theft, and I have every record to prove it. I gave you the opportunity to make it right, quietly. You chose not to. She folded her arms. It's not that deep. You're making it dramatic. I stepped closer, not aggressive, just close enough that she'd feel the difference between me and the version of me she thought still existed. This isn't drama. This is documentation. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For once, she looked unsure. Then one of her bridesmaids called her name, and like flipping a switch, she pasted on a smile and walked away, arm in arm with someone who thought she was lovely. Back inside the reception, people were laughing, music was climbing toward its crescendo, and the smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air. I sat down at an empty corner table and opened my phone. The contract file blinked up at me like an old friend. My name was still there, legal, dated, undeniable. In a separate email draft, I attached the original agreement, the payment receipts, and the email trail that traced every decision back to me. Subject line: Notice of service withdrawal. Immediate. I paused for one breath, then hit send. Let them enjoy the first course. It would be their last with my name attached. And when the silence hit their pockets, suddenly my voice mattered. The next course didn't arrive on time. At first, it was subtle. A few guests looked around, wondering why the carving station sat unmanned. Then whispers started floating from table to table. Where's the staff? Did someone forget the pasta? One woman flagged down a passing server and asked about the missing entree options. He smiled awkwardly, then disappeared into the kitchen. I kept my seat, eyes forward, lips pressed. Then came the moment I'd anticipated. Right on cue. Across the room, Marceline stood near the head table, adjusting her veil and laughing a little louder than necessary. But her smile faltered when she noticed the confused expressions rippling through the guests. A man, likely the father of the groom, turned to her with a raised brow. What's going on with the food? The service just stopped. She blinked, then looked around. I saw it then, her realizing something was off. But she didn't connect the dots yet. Instead, she responded with a tone that carried farther than she thought. Joy had one thing to manage. Honestly, I should have handled it myself. Heads turned. My name hung in the air like humidity before a storm. The silence that followed didn't last long. Someone near the back table gave a light chuckle. Others just looked at me, some puzzled, some curious. I didn't flinch. It wasn't just the public blame that stung. It was the casual way she tossed it, as if my only value was the job she'd reassigned me, as if my existence in this entire event was tied to one obligation, and failing, that meant I failed entirely. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I stood and slipped out through the nearest side door, heels muted against the stone pathway as I made my way to the garden. The air outside felt thicker, but at least it wasn't full of manufactured smiles and champagne breath. Once out of sight, I pulled out my phone. No trembling hands, no shallow breathing, just the steady rhythm of consequence. I opened my inbox, found the catering contact labeled Operations, and began to type. Effective immediately, I am canceling service under the original agreement. Your team is not liable for any additional events beyond the reception dinner. Final payment will not be processed. Attached were the contracts, payment records, and digital signature logs. All of it, locked in place like well-positioned chess pieces. I pressed send. Back inside, the shift was instant. The kitchen door stayed closed. Staff members clustered near the prep hallway, whispering into headsets. Then chaos. A flustered coordinator approached Marceline with a tight-lipped expression. She whispered something, and Marceline's face changed. Not confused, furious. Her hand flew to her chest, as if physically wounded. What do you mean they're leaving? She hissed. Who gave them that order? The coordinator leaned in closer. I couldn't hear it from the garden, but I saw the words land. Marceline spun on her heel and stormed out the back, scanning the perimeter until she caught sight of me, seated beneath a small tree, sipping from a bottle of water I'd brought earlier. Her steps were sharp, but I didn't bother standing. She stopped a few feet from me, hands clenched. "You sent the cancellation?" I tilted my head slightly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "That was childish, Joy." I smiled, slow and unbothered. "No, that was contractual." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes flicked to the Yorkie curled up beside me, the same one from earlier in the lobby. He stirred, then settled his chin on my knee. "Guests are asking questions," she snapped. "They'll get answers, just not from me." For the first time all weekend, I saw her falter. "You're going to ruin everything," she said, her voice lower now. I shook my head. "You did that when you thought stealing my name was easier than giving me credit." She didn't have a comeback, just silence, and I didn't fill it for her. She turned stiff and walked away, heels clacking against the flagstone path, each step more frantic than the last. I leaned back against the tree trunk, watching as lanterns flickered overhead. The chaos behind the walls of the reception wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the ones who built it without me, who edited me out like I was an inconvenience. The Yorkie nudged my hand again. I patted his head gently. "You don't owe anyone anything just because you're quiet," I murmured to him, though it was just as much for me. For the first time that day, I smiled, and meant it. I had the truth, and the receipts to back it up. I woke the next morning to the muffled sound of polite chaos. Voices outside the suite echoed through the hallway, tight, sharp, clipped in that particular tone people use when trying not to panic in formal clothes. For a moment, I let myself stay still. The sheets around me were tangled, and the pillow smelled like hairspray and hotel detergent. The Yorkie, now familiar, curled in a warm circle on the armchair by the window. Even he looked exhausted by it all. Eventually, I sat up, reached for my phone, and checked my email. The confirmation from the catering company had come through. Service terminated. Contract voided. Final payment revoked. No need for drama, just facts. By the time I made my way downstairs, the lobby was buzzing. I heard my name, or rather, a version of it, before I saw her. Joy had one responsibility, Marceline hissed to the planner, her jaw tight and shoulders squared. "And now there's no brunch? What the hell am I supposed to tell everyone?" The planner held up both hands. "We only followed the legal order. It came with documentation." "I don't care what it came with. Fix it." Her words stabbed the air with the same elegance as her French manicure. But the food never arrived, not a single plate. The courtyard had been set beautifully. White linen cloths, mason jars of wildflowers, monogrammed menus with "Love is served," embossed in gold. Only there was no food to match the message. Guests milled around with coffee and awkward conversation. One couple had clearly just realized their flight wouldn't wait forever. I kept my distance. A few bridesmaids avoided my gaze. One offered a tight smile, the kind you give when you're not sure whose side you're on yet. It wasn't until I returned to my room that I saw it. Another text. From my mother. "What you're doing is childish. You're humiliating us. Family reputation is more important than your pride." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Childish. Pride. Reputation. I could hear her voice in my head, saying the same thing when I cried at a birthday party I wasn't invited to, when I stayed quiet about being left out of Christmas plans, when I asked why no one came to my college graduation. They never used fists. They used language and expectation. I typed back, "You taught me not to raise my voice, so I pulled the plug instead." I didn't wait for a reply. I packed my things slowly, deliberately, folded my dress, zipped my shoes into the bottom pouch of my luggage, slipped the hotel key card into the side pocket of my purse. Then, just before heading out, I stopped by the front desk. "Hi," I said. "Room 306, Joy Garrow, checking out." The concierge tapped a few keys, then frowned slightly. Sorry, ma'am. I'm not seeing your name under the wedding party. Are you with the vendor group?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" She smiled kindly, assuming this was a mix-up. The bridal suite submitted a revised list this morning. Your name isn't listed, so I'm just trying to place where your charges fall. My stomach didn't drop. It calcified. They didn't just want to ignore me. They wanted me erased. I'm not with the vendor group, I said calmly, but thank you. Outside, I stood on the hotel steps, suitcase in hand, letting the sun hit my face for a beat longer than necessary. It was already warm, too warm for wool or pretending. I looked at my reflection in the glass doors. They took my seat. Then they took my name. And now, they'd tried to take my existence. But I was still standing, still breathing, still here. I pulled out my phone, not to scroll, not to complain, but to act. I opened a group contact folder I hadn't touched in years. College friends who now worked in law, nonprofit boards, event equity. I tapped 3 names, then 5, then 7. This wasn't about brunch anymore. This wasn't even about me. It was about how easily stories like mine got deleted in real time by people who smiled while they did it. If they can rewrite history, I whispered to my reflection, I can rewrite legacy. I tucked my phone away, stepped down onto the sidewalk, and kept walking. And some echoes don't fade. They transform. By midday, I was back near the venue, not because I needed to be there, but because I chose to be. Not to witness anything, but to finish what I started. The chaos had quieted into something more dangerous, speculation. Not from the family, of course. They were still spinning, trying to locate the leak. But the internet had already done what it always does best: dig, connect, and devour. It started with a short clip. A wedding guest had taken a casual video of me in the lobby the day before, juggling 4 leashes and holding a boxed meal in my lap. The caption read, "Turns out the woman holding the dogs paid for the wedding. Family made her the pet sitter." 23 seconds. That's all it took. I watched the clip go from a handful of likes to over 10,000 in under 2 hours. The comments hit faster than I expected. Is this real? How do people do this to their own? Her face is what quiet betrayal looks like. I didn't share the video. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. When truth is quiet and recorded, it becomes undeniable. Around 2 p.m., I returned to the venue with one purpose: not to confront, not to rejoin, just to deliver. The wedding coordinator was standing near the loading bay, clipboard tucked tight against her chest. Her eyes widened when she saw me approach. "I won't stay," I told her. "But can you give this to Marceline?" I handed over the envelope. It wasn't thick, just enough to carry what mattered. Inside, a printed copy of the original catering contract, all receipts attached to my name, a formal service withdrawal notice, and a handwritten note that read, "Don't confuse silence with surrender." The coordinator nodded, unsure what to say. I turned and walked away before she could think of anything. By the time evening arrived, I was already halfway back to my hotel. I turned off notifications, silenced calls, but not before one text slipped through. From Elise, the planner. "You know they're scrambling, right? A reporter called about the video." I didn't reply. Back at the hotel, I watched it all unfold from a distance. The brunch was canceled. Guests left early. My mother texted the family group chat a photo of the couple cutting cake, with a caption that read, "Let's focus on the love, not the noise." But it was too late. The noise was louder than the violinists she hired for ambiance. And for once, I wasn't the one they muted. That night, as I prepared to leave Savannah, I took one last walk past the reception hall. The lights were dimmed, and the staff were folding chairs, clearing flower petals from the lawn. I moved quietly, not because I was hiding, but because I had nothing left to prove. As I turned the corner toward the main drive, I heard small footsteps behind me. It was Zoe, my cousin's daughter, barely 12, still in her ballet flats and floral dress. She looked up at me and held out a phone. "Is this you?" she asked. It was the video. Of course it was. I nodded. "I thought you were just helping," she said. I smiled softly. "I was." She stepped forward and hugged me. You were brave. I hugged her back, breathing in the simplicity of her honesty. No filter, no agenda. Brave would have been walking away sooner, I told her, not bitterly, but truthfully. She handed me a bracelet, beads spelling out joy in bright plastic letters. I made this before the wedding, she said, but no one told me where to find you. I took it like it was gold. Thank you, Zoe. You found me just fine. As Zoe ran back toward her mom, I slipped the bracelet into my pocket. It clinked against my hotel keycard like it belonged there. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back at the venue one last time. That place had seen enough of me, or maybe never really saw me at all. 2 days later, I was back in Austin. The air was different, less staged, more honest. I walked into my apartment, dropped my luggage near the front door, and stood there in the quiet. No lingering perfume from strangers, no folding chairs, just hardwood floors, soft lighting, and the hum of my fridge. Mine. That morning, while folding laundry, my phone rang. Dad's name lit up the screen. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Part of me expected the silence to just swallow the moment whole, but I answered. Hey, he said, his voice careful, like he wasn't sure if he'd dialed the right version of me. I waited. Your mom asked me to call. I almost smiled at how predictable that line was. We didn't handle things the way we should have, he continued. We should have done more. I stayed quiet. He added, You were right, but you should have said something earlier. My voice came out steady. I've said it for years. You just didn't listen. He didn't argue, didn't push back. There was a pause, and then he mumbled something about taking care of himself, said goodbye, and hung up. That call wasn't for me. It was for them, and I didn't feel better. But I didn't feel responsible either, and that was new. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and logged into a platform I used for work, part messaging hub, part scheduling. I needed something normal, something that wasn't tied to flower arrangements or name tags. While waiting for files to sync, I scrolled through social media just out of habit, and that's when I saw it. Family, wedding weekend. That was the caption, posted by Marceline. Same photo style as always, white vignette filter, curated smiles. Mom, Dad, the new in-laws, bridesmaids. Even the Yorkie was there. Except me. At first glance, it looked like I'd just stepped out of frame. But then I saw the shoulder seam. Mine. Cropped. Clean. Intentional. I didn't zoom in. I didn't save it. I didn't send it to anyone. Instead, I powered off the phone and placed it upside down on the counter. They could crop me from pictures, but not from memory. Not from facts. And certainly not from the truth I now owned in full. The next morning, I sat by my desk, cleaning out my inbox. I deleted over 200 unread wedding emails, vendor quotes, music preferences, seating charts. It felt like erasing chalk from a board that no one else had ever written on. A friend called during my second coffee. You didn't leak the video to press, right? She asked, her voice part curious, part admiring. No, I said gently. Didn't need to. There was a pause and she laughed. Classy. My coworker popped her head into the room. 10 minutes to pitch. Got it, I said. I stood, smoothed my shirt, checked my lipstick in the darkened laptop screen, and grabbed my notes. I belonged here. After the call, with the meeting wrapped and my adrenaline finally settling, I opened a journal app I hadn't touched in months. There it was. An unsent letter. Addressed to Marceline. I clicked it open. You erased me, but I won't spend my life trying to write myself back in. I hovered over the delete button, then clicked it. She didn't deserve the weight of my words, not anymore. Maybe she never did. I stood, walked to the window, and opened it. The wind outside smelled like jasmine and something warmer, like relief. I wasn't healed, not entirely, but I was whole, and that was enough. I was never too sensitive. I was just too silent, until silence became my strongest voice. Hi, my name's Kania. They called me the poor girl at my own school's talent show, then told the crowd I wasn't even supposed to be on the list. My sister made a joke of my performance online. My mother said nothing, again. But that night, someone stood up. A stranger. And what he remembered about me changed everything. So let me ask you, what's worse, being forgotten by the world, or being quietly erased by the people who share your last name? Let me show you what silence can really do. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't want to be seen walking in late, like an afterthought. The auditorium smelled like pine-scented cleaner and old wood. Warm lights buzzed overhead, yet I still felt like I'd stepped into somewhere I wasn't invited. Mom gave me a half wave from across the aisle, one of those gestures that said, "You made it," not, "I'm glad you're here." She didn't rise. She didn't smile. My sister Jolene, on the other hand, was glowing in the front row, surrounded by polished parents in shiny boots and oversized scarves. Their voices swirled around her like perfume. As I stood at the entrance, unsure of where to go, Jolene popped up and motioned me over. "Kenya," she said, cheerful like a kindergarten teacher. "We saved you a seat." The seat was near the back, pressed against the wall beside the restroom sign and a mop bucket. The cushion was thin and slightly damp. I hesitated. Jolene leaned down beside me and whispered, "It's kind of last minute down here, but you don't mind, right? You've always been low maintenance." I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? I slid into the chair. The metal legs squeaked. My dress brushed against the mop bucket's rim, and I caught a faint smell of bleach that settled right under my nose. I stared straight ahead, trying not to notice how everyone else was seated in clusters, smiling and leaning in to share whispers. I was a placeholder, an obligation with legs. Minutes passed. The show hadn't even started, and I already wanted to leave. But then Jolene's voice rang out again. She'd turned to the row behind us, speaking to two women in wool coats and name tags. "This is my sister, Kenia. She's performing tonight." The ladies smiled politely. Jolene continued, tone as sweet as oversteeped tea. "She's so brave. I mean, not many kids would go up there without private lessons or anything, right?" The women nodded, murmured something about courage. I felt my stomach twist. Jolene wasn't done. "We're all just really proud of her," I told Mom. "It doesn't matter how it sounds. It's about effort." I turned slowly toward her. She didn't meet my eyes. Just smiled at the women like she was selling something and they were holding their wallets. One of them patted my shoulder. "Good for you, honey. That's what matters." I wanted to ask her what she thought actually mattered, but I just smiled, barely. They didn't mean harm, but their kindness felt like the kind reserved for charity cases. When Jolene sat down again, she said softly, "Don't let the nerves get to you. Just play like you're in your room." Then, louder, "She writes her own songs, you know." I leaned back in my seat and let my head tilt toward the ceiling, trying to focus on the stage. The curtains hadn't even parted, but I already felt the audience's eyes labeling me. Brave, poor, different. I'd been here before, metaphorically. At birthdays where my name was last on the cake. At holidays where Jolene's gift bags had tags from Macy's, and mine said clearance in tiny font. At the dentist's office when Mom filled out her insurance info and whispered, "Only do the cleaning, not the extras." I learned young that silence was safer than saying, "This isn't fair." Because when I said it once, years ago, Mom sighed like I'd embarrassed her, and Jolene said I had a complex. From then on, I tucked the unfairness into my socks and walked on it. It didn't go away. It just made my steps quieter. Jolene took a photo with her friends, fluffing her hair just right. I sat still. I wasn't part of the picture, even though I was in the frame. From the pocket of my cardigan, I felt the folded edge of the music sheet I'd rewritten by hand. The original had a coffee stain from the diner. I'd copied it carefully last night while Mom dozed off on the couch. She didn't ask what I was writing. I touched the paper now, just the edge, enough to remind myself it was still there. Maybe that's what kept me sitting, not courage, not obligation, just the knowledge that even if no one asked, I'd come here carrying something real. I could have walked out. There was still time. The auditorium doors were open, the streetlights were on outside. No one would chase me. But the thing about being humiliated isn't that it crushes you immediately. It teaches you how to wait. But waiting doesn't mean surrendering. The auditorium lights flickered once, then settled. That was my cue to head backstage. I slid my music sheet back into my pocket and followed the hall toward the dressing area. The hallway narrowed, lined with student posters and leftover flyers from the science fair. I walked alone. Always alone, unless someone needed something. Inside the dressing room, the atmosphere hit me like hairspray. Girls were everywhere, adjusting glitter headbands, arguing over mascara, snapping selfies with fake peace signs. Laughter popped in waves, and the Bluetooth speaker on the windowsill blared a remix of something with too much bass. No one looked up when I came in. I dropped my duffel onto the far bench. It made a flat thump that nobody heard. I knelt, unzipped it, and reached for the navy blue dress I'd ironed last night and folded with care. Except it wasn't there. In its place was a thin plastic grocery bag holding what looked like fabric? I pulled it out, heart already tight. It was my dress, but not as I'd packed it. The bodice was soaked. Dark splotches had bloomed across the front like a bad watercolor. The smell was sharp, cleaner, maybe bleach. Someone had balled it up and left it for dead. I stared at it, my throat dry. A girl 2 benches down glanced at me, then leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Who did that?" I asked. Not loud, but not soft either. A redhead shrugged. "I think it got dropped or something. Might have landed in the janitor's bin." "Sorry." Jolene's voice floated from across the room. "Oh no, that's the dress you were gonna wear?" She walked over, feigning concern. "Well, maybe it's a sign to keep it simple, Ken. You know, focus on the music." Then she turned to the mirror and adjusted her earrings. I didn't respond. I just packed the ruined dress back into the bag, shoved it deep into my duffel, and pulled out my fallback. Black jeans and a wrinkled gray top with tiny holes near the seam. It didn't matter anymore. I changed in the corner, moving like I wasn't there. The laughter never dipped. After slipping on my sneakers, I stepped into the hallway, hoping the air would be different. It wasn't. A stagehand passed by, took one glance at the safety pin I used to cinch my top at the side, and handed me a fresh one without a word. I nodded in thanks. I didn't flinch when I reached for the mic stand at the prep area. I adjusted it exactly how I'd practiced. The stand clicked, the cord coiled. I checked the pedal. Everything was functional, even if I felt like I wasn't. As I leaned over to tighten the cable, a memory crawled up behind me. Last week, while the sign-up sheets were still fresh on the wall, I asked Jolene if she'd seen my letter of confirmation. She shrugged. "Maybe you didn't get in. Or maybe your Gmail's full again. Didn't you miss that email about picture day too?" I remember blinking, then nodding, thinking I was the one at fault. But the next afternoon, while taking out the trash, I found it. My envelope. It was half-torn, stuffed between empty juice boxes. Addressed to me. The seal ripped just enough to hide that it had been opened. I didn't confront her. Not because I was afraid. Because it felt like arguing with a wall that would smile while it blocked you. So, I said nothing. I signed the duplicate form quietly and reprinted my music sheet. Jolene had her spotlight. She always would. I'd learned that long ago. But she couldn't take the sound I carried. The one that didn't need lights, or fabric, or applause. I took a deep breath now and ran my fingers over the edge of the keys. Unplugged, silent, waiting for my turn. I didn't need confirmation to belong here. She could ruin a dress. She could lose an email. But she couldn't erase the chords in my hands. Behind me, I heard her laughter again. Perfect, polished, practiced. Someone complimented her lipstick. Someone else asked who did her hair. I didn't turn. I walked to the side of the stage and stood just off the curtain. I watched her reflection glide across the mirror. Not a strand of her hair was out of place. She caught my gaze in the reflection and smirked. But I didn't blink. I didn't return it. I just waited, not because I had to. Because I chose to. The dress was ruined, but not the song. I didn't need a clock to know when it was my turn. The air around me stiffened, and the hallway sounds narrowed into a tunnel. Claps fading, shoes tapping the linoleum, my own breath steady and shallow. I gripped the edge of the curtain like it might keep me upright. A voice from the stage boomed into the mic, cheerful but uncertain. Next up, we have, Kendra. Kendra Rollings? Some laughter scattered through the front row. A teacher coughed. A parent snorted. The MC tried again. I'm sorry, Kara? Kara Rollins? My stomach flipped, but my face didn't move. I stepped forward. It's Kenia, I said softly. No one corrected him. No one repeated it. I walked to the piano in silence, each step heavier than the last. The lights dimmed behind me, spotlight sharp on my shoulder blades. The audience settled, except for the ones still whispering. Jolene didn't say a word. She sat 2 rows from the front, arms crossed, smiling slightly, like someone who already knew the punchline to a joke no one else got yet. I sat down, adjusted the bench, just as I had 100 times in the garage with that cracked keyboard, and pressed my fingers to the keys. The first note came out soft. Too soft. I paused, then began again. This time, it rang clear. I moved through the melody slow and sure, the notes stretching out like threads I was weaving together to make a space that felt like mine. But the room didn't shift with me. No heads nodded, no phones lifted, no one leaned in. I finished with a quiet phrase, 3 notes that landed like breath on a mirror. And then, nothing. No clapping, no polite hum, just a chair creaking and someone coughing twice. Quick. My hands hovered for a second above the keys. My shoulders stayed still. I looked up. My mom's eyes met mine. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her hands. She folded them in her lap like she was waiting for church to be over. No tears, no pride. Just quiet. That kind of quiet tells you everything. It tells you not to ask. It tells you this moment was never meant for you. I stood, nodded, walked off stage without bowing. My hands were cold, my throat tight, but not a single tear made it out. I was done giving them the satisfaction. Backstage, the world was louder. Kids in costumes giggled. Someone dropped a prop. Jolene stood in front of a mirror with a girl from her dance team fixing her bun. As I passed, one of the stagehands touched my elbow gently. Hey, he murmured. Your name wasn't printed in the program. We were told you withdrew. I blinked. What? He looked apologetic. I double-checked the sheet before the show. Someone said you pulled out last minute. I didn't realize. It's fine, I said, but we both knew it wasn't. He handed me a copy of the show schedule, the MC's copy, the one with annotations. I glanced down. Slot 4. Withdrawn. I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out my folded copy of the original program. There it was. Kenia Rollins, original piano composition, threaded light. Exactly where it should have been. She'd told them I quit. Not out loud, of course. Jolene never made noise when she could make moves. She didn't scream. She orchestrated. I watched her reflection in the mirror. Still perfect, still untouched. She turned slightly, saw me holding the paper, and smiled like she was posing for a picture only she could see. I didn't smile back. Instead, I folded the page again, tucked it back in my pocket. Proof doesn't undo the erasure, but it keeps you sane. I kept the folded program in my pocket as the crowd shifted into intermission. The hallway filled with people heading to the vending machines, the restroom, or nowhere in particular. Just somewhere to stretch and gossip. I turned down the side corridor where the green room was and leaned against the wall. I wasn't hiding, not exactly. I just needed to breathe without being watched. I didn't expect the buzz in the hallway to turn into a notification on my phone. But it did. I opened the screen, and there it was, shared in the class group chat. A TikTok, my performance. Jolene had added a soundtrack, circus music, full of squeaky horns and a laugh track. The clip cut off right after my last note and froze on my face, mid-blink, lips slightly parted. The caption read, "She tried, factor courage, she's offbeat." It already had a dozen laughing reactions. Someone commented, "Is she okay?" Another said, "Brave, for real." Jolene's username was right there at the top. No shame, no hiding. If shame was a knife, this one had glitter on the handle and a slow twist. A couple of girls walked past me and looked down at their phones, then at me. Their mouths didn't move, but their eyes did all the talking. I slid the phone into my jacket, face down, and headed into a supply closet across the hall. It smelled like paper and acrylic paint. I locked the door behind me. No tears. Not yet. I sank down beside a stack of folding chairs and rested my head against the wall. It wasn't just the video. It wasn't just the caption. It was the fact that she wanted people to laugh. And no one had stopped her. No one ever did. Outside the door, the intermission announcements continued. I stayed in the dark. Quiet. Still. I didn't cry. Not because I was trying to be tough. I didn't cry because my mind was busy doing math, adding up moments, patterns, choices. Not mistakes. Choices. Jolene didn't slip. She aimed. When the knock came, I didn't answer. It wasn't for me anyway, just a janitor checking the rooms. After he left, I pulled out my phone again. My thumb hovered over the message icon. Instead, I opened my old inbox. A folder I rarely touched. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Just something that said I'd been right all along. And there it was. An email from nearly a year ago. Subject: Congratulations. Regional Student Honors, Winter Body. Dear Kenya, we are pleased to inform you that your composition, Beneath Blue, has been selected. My eyes scanned the screen, my stomach tight. I had never seen this. Below it sat another message, unopened, time-stamped the same day. From Jolene Faye. Subject: Do not send this. Body: You're going to embarrass yourself. I deleted it. You should be thanking me. It was all there. My name, my song, her decision. She didn't sabotage me in front of a crowd. She did it quietly, confidently, like someone convinced the spotlight belonged to her by birthright. I leaned back and stared at the wall. Paint chips curled at the edges of a faded mural. A tree without leaves. A sun with no face. The theft wasn't the dress, or the name, or the applause. It was the chance. To be seen. To be named out loud in a room that wasn't laughing. I stood, brushed off my jeans, and stepped back into the hall. I passed two teachers. One gave me a tight nod. The other said, "Hang in there," like I'd been chosen for sympathy. Jolene stood in the corner by the trophy case, talking with Mr. Saunders from the school board. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Hey, Ken," she called. "You okay? People can be so mean online." I didn't answer. I walked right past her and toward the lockers near the exit. My phone buzzed again. Another repost, another comment, but I didn't check. Instead, I opened a new note and began to type. Not to Jolene, not to anyone, just to myself. You've been erased before. Don't let it stick this time. I hit save, then closed the screen. The girl they laughed at online wasn't finished. She was just getting started. The house lights flickered twice, once to warn, once to reset. I stayed seated on the floor near the exit doors, arms wrapped around my knees, phone screen gone black in my lap. Intermission was ending, and the room beyond the auditorium doors started humming again. Programs rustled, heels tapped, kids were being corralled back into seats by the dozen. I didn't move. I wasn't hiding. I was just no longer sure I wanted to be seen. Someone passed me in the hall without looking twice. A volunteer parent, maybe. She was saying something about the next act being Jolene's group. Oh, she's so polished. It's unreal. Of course she was. I stood eventually, but not to return to my seat. I meant to slip out quietly, before the clapping started again, before anyone noticed I had nothing left to give. My backpack was half-zipped, music folder shoved inside, corners poking out like broken wings. But then a voice caught hold of the room. It wasn't loud. That's what made people turn. "Excuse me," he said. The man who stood had been in the last row all evening. I hadn't noticed him until now. Tall, gray hair, hands clasped behind his back, like someone used to being listened to only when he chose to speak. The MC paused mid-sentence, confused. "Yes, sir?" He stepped forward slowly, no rush in his gait. His voice stayed level. "Before the next group performs, may I ask, was that an original composition the young woman played earlier?" Silence fell like dust. Someone whispered. A program dropped. I stood still just outside the entrance, staring at the hinge of the door. My mom turned in her seat to look at him. Jolene blinked, as if something on stage had betrayed her. The room waited. The MC looked around, unsure if he should answer. The man repeated, a little softer this time. "Did she write that piece herself?" His eyes landed on me through the open auditorium door. They weren't questioning. They were verifying. I took a small step forward. My hands trembled only slightly. I said, "Yes." Not loudly, but I didn't shrink from the sound of it either. Somewhere, a student coughed. Another muttered, "I think she did." Like it changed something now. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Thank you," he said, then turned toward the crowd. "That was music, not performance, not technical display. That was music." He pulled out his phone and, without theatrics, tapped a screen. "I believe I've seen her before," he continued. 3 years ago, outside a gas station in Pella, playing a beat-up keyboard with a sticky middle C. No sheet music, no showmanship, just playing something that made strangers stop and listen." He held up the screen. I saw the thumbnail of the video instantly. Me, 10 years old, hoodie up, fingers small and fast over worn-out keys in a parking lot while Mom was inside paying for gas. The room was still. He turned the phone to the judges. "She moved people then," he said, "and she moved me tonight." My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from recognition, the kind that settles instead of startles. I hadn't even known someone was watching that day. I thought I was playing into a void, just keeping my fingers moving, so I didn't think too much about the cold or the silence around us. But someone had seen it, and kept it, and remembered. He turned back to me. "If you're willing, would you play it again?" he asked. "This time, with accompaniment?" A wave passed through the room. Not noise, just the shift of weight, the rustle of attention changing hands. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to, because for the first time all night, no one was laughing. I stood, not because I had to, but because something in my legs wouldn't let me sit still anymore. The kind of stillness that had kept me invisible for too long. As I moved down the aisle toward the stage, the lights above dipped again. Arlo was already waiting by the side curtain. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. Calm, steady, like this wasn't a performance, but a conversation that deserved to continue. The piano sat where I left it, quiet and patient, as if it had been listening all along. I reached it without looking at anyone. Not Mom, not Jolene, not even the judges. My feet found their place. My hands hovered. And then it came. A voice from the front row, high-pitched and sharp with childhood honesty. "Didn't her sister say she only got picked 'cause they felt bad?" It was Daisy Quinn, first row regular, choir club favorite, and Jolene's tutoring kid last year. Her words hit the air like a dropped glass. You could hear how many people wanted to clean it up, but no one moved. The tension twisted in the seats behind me. A teacher cleared her throat, as if that would cover the sound. Jolene didn't say a word. She looked forward, stone-faced. I let my fingers press the first keys. I didn't need to correct Daisy. I didn't need to say, "That's not true," because the music would do it for me. Arlo took a seat beside me. He didn't take over. He didn't lead. He let me begin. I started slow, so slow I could hear the dust on the strings. The first few notes stretched like breath through a straw, uncertain but deliberate. I kept my eyes on the keys, not because I was afraid to look up, but because this was between me and the music now. And then, without cue, without pause, Arlo joined in. Not loud, not even strong, just enough. He layered chords beneath mine like scaffolding for a building I'd already built, but was afraid to step inside. And somehow, with him there, the roof didn't feel so far anymore. My left hand told the story of the house I grew up in. Quiet, cold, but standing. My right hand offered windows, cords that let the light in, even when the curtains stayed drawn. The song built itself. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't exaggerate the hard parts or skip the small ones. I played like the version of myself that existed when no one was looking, when I was just a girl on a porch step with a pencil and a keyboard missing its B. Somewhere mid-piece, I closed my eyes. Not for drama, for safety, because I didn't want to be pulled out of it by a cough or a look or Jolene's stillness. I stayed in that place until the last note fell like a feather into the center of the room. Silence followed, but this one was different. No giggles, no fidgeting, no fake coughs trying to distract, just still. Then a single clap. Not a teacher, not a parent. It was one of the younger students in the front. She didn't even look around first, she just clapped. Then another, and then the whole auditorium followed. It wasn't a standing ovation, it wasn't screaming, it wasn't chaos. It was cleaner than that, like the sound of a door unlocking. Quiet. Real. One judge stood, then two. I didn't bow, I didn't smile. I just turned slightly to acknowledge the room, because finally it had acknowledged me. I stood and stepped away from the piano. Arlo touched my shoulder, just once. It felt more like a thank you than a congratulations. As I walked off stage, I caught Mom's face. She wasn't clapping. She looked tired, or embarrassed, or both. Jolene wasn't clapping either. She was staring at me like I had stolen something from her, like the stage had been a rug pulled out from under her heels. But I didn't owe her anything, and I didn't take anything that didn't belong to me. Back behind the curtain, Arlo didn't say a word. He just nodded again. Quiet, consistent, the way people do when they've already decided you matter. I stood for a moment beside the curtain, listening as the MC scrambled to introduce the next act. His voice stumbled over the name. A juggler? A comedy sketch? It didn't matter. The room had already heard what it came for. I stayed a few beats longer, watching the lights shift on stage, but no one really looked at them. They were still looking for me. I didn't rush back to my seat. I stayed near the curtain just long enough to see the lights dim again, then slipped quietly into the side aisle. The audience was still buzzing, but softer now, like they didn't know how to return to regular volume after what they'd just heard. The next act was already on stage, but no one was watching. A boy in a tuxedo balanced spinning plates on sticks. One wobbled. No one clapped when he saved it. Then, Arlo stood again. This time, he didn't approach the mic. He simply turned to the auditorium and said, loud enough for the room to hear, but soft enough to make everyone lean in. I came tonight to find one student deserving of a full scholarship in composition and performance. And I've found her. He gestured toward me. The effect was immediate, a ripple, a collective intake of breath. A few heads swiveled toward Jolene. She froze, hands still folded neatly in her lap, but her jaw tightened. I saw it from the corner of my eye. Delpha Ray, the woman I still wasn't sure I could call Mom without flinching, kept her eyes fixed on the carpet. Arlo continued. It was not just talent. It was honesty, and courage, and clarity of voice. He nodded once, as if that was all he needed to say. A long second passed. Then the murmurs began. Teachers whispered. A judge leaned over to another. She wasn't even on the official program. he said, eyebrows raised. Arlo turned toward him. Which tells me more about the system than about the student. You could feel the tension shift. Not break, just shift. Some clapped. Others waited, uncertain, measuring how much they should care now that someone important did. Some people clap because they believe. Others clap because they're afraid not to. Jolene didn't clap, but Mrs. Aldridge did. She stood up halfway back in the room. Floral blouse, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain, the kind of mom who always volunteers but never gets thanked. My son submitted a piece last month, she said, her voice shaking just enough to be heard. He was told he wasn't polished enough. No one responded. She kept going. But maybe it wasn't about polish. Maybe it was about who he's not related to. That landed. More murmurs. A judge shifted in their seat. One teacher started flipping through the program like it could explain itself. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Arlo turned to me again and held out a piece of paper. No ceremony, no fake smile. I walked toward him and took it. It was heavy stock, hand-signed at the bottom. The Maddox Foundation. A weekend mentorship, full ride, open-ended. I folded it once, neatly, and slipped it into the same pocket where my music had been all night. I turned back toward the audience. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I didn't make eye contact with Jolene, even though I could feel her trying to pull mine. Instead, I walked down the side steps and slid into an empty chair in the far row. No one stopped me. No one leaned in to whisper. They'd heard enough. The MC stood awkwardly at the side of the stage, eyes darting between his clipboard and the crowd. He cleared his throat. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for their performances tonight. Our final act will be... He didn't finish. Jolene had stood up. Her hands shook slightly, her mouth opened. I think, she started, voice thin but reaching. I think there's something we should clear up. But the MC interrupted gently, firm like someone who'd had enough. We'll continue with the scheduled performances now. Let's respect the time. Jolene stayed standing, for too long, just long enough to feel the discomfort settle around her. Then she sat. Not everything ends with applause. Sometimes it ends with silence too loud to walk through. As the final act wrapped with a shaky rendition of a pop song, people began gathering in the lobby. Parents congratulated their kids with programmed pride. Teachers offered half smiles. The judges stood off to one side, talking in tight clusters. I could feel the shift in the air, not dramatic, just dense. Something had settled. I stayed near the side wall, folding my sheet music into my bag with a kind of ceremony. Not because I needed to protect it, but because it had protected me. That music was the only thing in the room that never lied. Jolene found her way backstage, brushing past a few students without a word. She had her voice back now. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said to one of the event coordinators, her tone light, professional. This has all gone sideways. There's been some confusion, and I think we should clarify a few things before anyone... He didn't answer. No one did. People looked away, not rude, just uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort that meant they'd seen too much to unsee it now. I walked past her without acknowledging her. I didn't need to say anything. That silence she'd weaponized for years? It belonged to me now. Before I reached the main exit, a student aide caught up with the MC and handed him a sealed envelope. This just arrived. Ms. Farrow sent it over from the district. He frowned slightly and opened it, cleared his throat, then walked back to the mic still set up near the judging table. People quieted instinctively. He read, To whom it may concern, I taught both Kanaya Rollins and Jolene Fay during their middle school music courses. I had the rare experience of seeing their early development, not only as students, but as distinct voices. Jolene froze behind me. I watched one work hard to master technique. I watched the other, Kania, reach for something deeper, not for perfection, but for meaning. A hush fell across the room. There was an incident 3 years ago during a spring showcase. A melody was performed under Jolene's name that, in fact, had been written by Kanaya. I had no proof then, just instinct. But I want it on record now. I remember. He paused. I remember who wrote the melody. I remember who changed it just enough to call it her own. I could feel the blood pulsing behind my ears, but my face didn't move. Then came the final line, steady and without flourish. You don't always need to win to be right. You just need one person to remember. The MC folded the letter. That was it. No follow-up, no debate. Just truth. Simple, balanced, and heavier than any award. I didn't wait for anyone to comment. I picked up my bag, slung it over one shoulder, and walked toward the double doors. Nobody stopped me. Jolene didn't call out. Delpha didn't rise. I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was full. Full of all the words I'd swallowed, the songs I'd written in my head while pretending not to exist. That fullness carried me down the hallway, into the cool air of the lobby, and toward the corridor that led to the parking lot. Behind me, the lights dimmed. The room dispersed. Voices picked up again, quieter this time, uncertain. I made it halfway down the hallway before I heard footsteps behind me. Kenia? A voice called. I turned. Delpha stood there, arms crossed, hesitant. Not pleading, just hovering. Can we talk? She asked. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I was weighing something heavier than her question. I turned slightly, enough to let her know I'd heard her. Now you want to listen? She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her space to explain. I just nodded once, calm, not cold. I'm not angry, I said. I'm just tired of whispering into closed doors. We didn't speak again that night. Delpha stayed in the hallway, her arms crossed like a barrier she didn't know how to lower. She didn't call out after me, just stood there, in that flickering stretch of silence, like she was waiting for me to hand her something she hadn't earned. A clean exit, maybe, or forgiveness that came with a bow on top. A chance to still be the mother she had only just started trying to become. But trying doesn't erase the years you spent watching someone drown. So I left. Quietly. No tears, no shouting. Just me, my backpack, and the cold. It was the kind of cold that didn't bite. It settled in, slow and deep, the way certain truths do. I walked past the mailbox, past the porch where I used to sit after school, and out onto the street where my shadow stretched beside me, like it was relieved to be finally walking away too. 1 week passed before we spoke again. A Saturday afternoon. A gray sky, smudged like someone had dragged a wet brush across it. The kind of day that doesn't commit to rain, but holds the idea of it. Quiet and threatening, like a secret not ready to spill. We met at a small cafe near the park. It was nearly empty. Just the low hum of a dishwasher in the back, the hiss of steamed milk, and the occasional clink of a spoon in a ceramic cup. Delpha sat across from me, her posture careful, like even sitting down was a risk. She stirred her coffee slowly, staring into it like she expected it to speak first. They suspended Jolene from student council, she said, barely louder than the rustle of napkins between us. She's been removed from the award nomination list, too. I nodded. I already knew, kids talk. And when something crashes, especially someone like Jolene, the news spreads like wildfire on dry leaves. She says it's not fair, Delpha added, her voice catching slightly. Says people turned on her overnight. She wasn't exiled, I replied. She just stopped being the center of the room. The words sat between us, unblinking. Then she said, I didn't speak up. Not that night. Not before. I thought, if I chose a side, I'd lose the other. There was no excuse in her voice. No attempt to make herself smaller or more likable. Just the plain, hard truth. That was still a choice, I said gently. Even silence is a side. She didn't argue, and I didn't demand anything. No apology, no tidy explanations, no attempts to fix what had already been broken long before that night. We finished our drinks. I paid for mine. We stood, nodded goodbye, and left without hugging. No tears, no promises. Sometimes closure doesn't come with sweeping music or a well-lit goodbye. Sometimes it looks like two people walking away in opposite directions, both knowing something has ended. That evening, back at home, I checked the mailbox like I always did. Among the flyers and bills, one envelope stood out. Thick cream paper, blue ink, my name, handwritten. The return address read, Maddox Music Foundation. I opened it at the kitchen table, my hands steady but my breath tight. Inside was a formal acceptance letter. They wanted me in Chicago. A mentorship weekend. A scholarship that covered everything: tuition, travel, private lessons. A chance to grow, to create, to be among people who didn't just hear me, but listened. And at the bottom of the letter, in unmistakably careful handwriting, "See you soon, Kinya." A.M. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. But I held that letter like it had a pulse, like it knew the weight it carried. Validation didn't fix everything. It didn't stitch shut every wound or erase the ache of having to fight so long to be believed. But it reached something inside me I thought had long gone numb. It whispered, "You were right." And that was enough for now. Monday came, and I walked into school through the front entrance. Not the side door, not the back gate, the front. No one followed me in. No cameras. No phone in my hand pretending I had somewhere else to be. Some kids looked up and nodded. Some looked away. But no one laughed. No one sneered. Jolene was in the hallway when I passed. She didn't lift her eyes. I didn't slow my steps. I didn't need to. In the auditorium, the stage was stripped, chairs stacked off to the side. The leftover banners sagged slightly, their tape giving up. Near the edge of the stage, a broken music stand leaned awkwardly. One leg bent, its top still standing upright. I didn't sit in the back. I didn't rush to the front. I just chose a seat. Mine. Not the one someone else gave me. Not the one that was left over. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove I belonged. Because I knew I did. Not because of a trophy. Not because of a moment on stage. But because I kept going when it was easier to disappear. Because I stayed true when it cost me more than anyone knew. Because even when the applause stopped, I didn't. So no, I'm not asking to be seen anymore. I already am.